On this day in 1965, Pakistan won a heroic war of defense against India. If you haven't heard about that triumph, don't blame yourself. It never happened. But millions of Pakistanis believe that the Defense of Pakistan Day marked a triumph and that the country won the war of 1965. I'm going to talk you through 7 myths that many in Pakistan are taught to believe and the problems that underlie the story. The first of those myths is that India was the aggressor when its troops attacked across the border towards Lahore on the 6th of September. But actually, Pakistan had initiated the war by launching what's called Operation Gibraltar a month earlier on the 5th of August, when it sent in troops and guerrilla fighters into Indian Kashmir. Second, many Pakistanis believe that Operation Gibraltar was successful. The fact is, in fact, many of the infiltrators were turned in to the Indian Army and Kashmiri civilian authorities by local residents. Gibraltar was an utter failure. The failure of Operation Gibraltar forced the Pakistan Army to launch what it calls Operation Grand Slam, a conventional offensive into the Jammu area on the 1st of September. And that's what led to the Indian counter-offensive on the 5th. The third myth that many in Pakistan believe is that Grand Slam was successful. Its objective was to capture the town of Akhnur near Jammu, and that would have cut off India's supply lines into Kashmir. Pakistani forces did cross the Tavi River and capture the small town of Chamb, but they failed to capture Akhnur. The next myth. Many in Pakistan believe that it won the Battle of Khemkaran. There's actually a picture around showing a Pakistani general on the platform of a train station that is held up as evidence of this claim. But Pakistan's strategic reason for sending in its first armoured division was to cut off supply lines from Amritsar to Delhi. That wasn't achieved. Pakistan ended up losing 90 tanks in the Battle of Asal Uttar and did not even get close to its objective, the Grand Trunk Road from Delhi to Amritsar. The next myth is that by bombing Dwarka, the Pakistan Navy defeated the Indian Navy. But we know no real combat took place between the navies themselves. Lastly, this is the clincher. Everyone in Pakistan is taught to believe that their country won the war. Why then did it agree to sign a ceasefire on the 23rd of September without acquiring Kashmir, the point of going to war in the first place? The fact is that just 2 weeks into full-scale war, the Pakistan Army had begun to run out of artillery shells. Its air force was having serious problems meeting logistics to support its F-66 Sabre jets. On ground, there was a complete stalemate. When President Ayub Khan was informed of the ground realities, he knew the game was over. He blamed the United States, which had imposed an arms embargo on both combatants. In his own memoir, Friends Not Masters, there's hardly a passing mention of the war. In his personal diaries, General Ayub expressed misgivings about the conflict, perhaps not realizing that they would be published one day. You see, Ayub had been assured by his advisors that the war would remain confined to Kashmir. The Pakistan Army hadn't prepared itself for a full-scale war with India in the plains fought across the international border. In fact, about a quarter of the Pakistan Army was on leave when the war broke out. The Air Force and Navy were not consulted before the Army made the decision to launch its raids into Kashmir. They were therefore completely unprepared. Well, what actually happened? India responded to Pakistan's attack on Akhnur by attacking towards Lahore on the 6th of September. That's the day that's commemorated today in Pakistan as the Defense of Pakistan's Day. From military histories, we know that the Pakistani infantry put up a credible battle of defense, aided by the Air Force. This thwarted the Indian attack. India then attacked towards Chavinda, threatening Sialkot. Pakistan's infantry and armour, again backed by their air force, mounted a successful defence. On ground, you therefore had stalemate with none of Pakistan's initial war objectives met. How then have we got the myths we have? Part of the answers on the internet, where propaganda websites and dubious pseudo history dominate. Yet, the Pakistani government and successive military regimes have continued to build myths around Pakistan's victory. The topic hasn't been taught dispassionately. Among the heroes most beloved of this 65 war win myth, beloved to Pakistanis, is squadron leader Muhammad Mahmud Alam, who commanded the 11th Squadron of the Pakistan Air Force. Every Pakistani school kid knows squadron leader Alam shot down 5 Indian Air Force Hunter jets over Sargodha in just 30 seconds, 4 of which he brought down almost instantaneously. But did he really do that? This supposed feat is a little bit dubious. The Indian Air Force had indeed struck at Sargodha on the 7th of September 1965, backing its land offensive. 50% of the PAF's combat strength was located at this one base, and it was vital for the IAF to try and take it out. Therefore, the Indian Air Force planned and executed 6 strikes at different times of the day, hoping to catch the PAF on the ground. Could it have lost those jets? Well, the interesting thing is, Pakistan released the names of the 5 pilots shot down by squadron leader Alam: Kakkad, Devaya, Bhagwat, Guha and Brar. All those names figure in Indian Air Force accounts of the strikes on Sargodha. But the names aren't all in the 4th strike, which the PAF officials count as strike number 3, from which Alam is supposed to have shot down the 5 IAF hunters. Devaya was in the 1st strike, Kakkad in the 3rd strike, Guha in the 6th strike, Bhagwat and Brar were in the 4th strike. Alam simply couldn't have brought down all 5 planes in the same 30 seconds or so. It just isn't possible. You see, Alam became a hero for more reasons than one. Dhaka born, his family was deeply committed to Pakistan. It moved to the country, to West Pakistan, after Bangladesh attained liberation in the War of 1971. An East Pakistani patriot, a war hero, this was the stuff of which myths were made. And if 5 imaginary planes had to be brought down in 30 seconds, that was just a small price to pay for national prestige. As we look at Pakistan's myth-making on the War of 65 though, there's some lessons even Indians ought to learn. Indian pop history on the War of 71, War of 65, even the War of 1962 with China is full of boasting and historically dubious myths. 1965 wasn't a simple win for India. As I said, it was at best a draw. And even in the War of 1971, which India won, there were a great number of command failures and tactical lapses, especially on the Western Front, which were to cost India very dearly. The full story of poor generalship and errors of command and action during the Kargil War have yet to be told. But a nation which doesn't fully understand its military history, warts and all, is condemned to repeat its mistakes. Israel, after its 1973 war, actually had a judicial inquiry to investigate why its authorities had been negligent in mobilizing the reserves by 48 hours, even though the country resoundingly won the war. They knew that they simply couldn't afford errors and that high officials had to be held accountable for their lapses if there was to be improvement. In 1965, Pakistan chose myth-making instead of introspection and candor. It paid the price in the War of 1971, suffering a devastating defeat by India. In 1999 again, it tried to airbrush over and hide its aggression and subsequent mistakes, paving the foundations for more bloodshed. What lessons do we finally draw from this? Pakistan's 1965 campaign was a textbook case of fuzzy thinking and poor planning. It made assumptions about Kashmir which were proved to be untrue, and it executed its war and conduct of operations extremely poorly on the ground. If someone had been held to account and reforms put in place, who knows, the war of 1971 might have gone very differently. The big lie, however, has continued to sustain itself, and with probably toxic consequences for Pakistan for many years and maybe even generations to come. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint.